Hello everyone, welcome to today's story. Have you ever experienced the kind of loss that feels like your world has shattered? What happens when everything you've dreamed of slips away in an instant? Can you ever move forward, or does the past hold you captive forever? Today's story is about Diep, a woman whose life takes an unexpected turn, forcing her to confront heart-wrenching choices and painful losses. Will she find the strength to let go of her past and embrace a new future? Or will the weight of her grief be too much to bear? Stay with us until the end to discover how love, loss, and hope can intertwine in the most unexpected ways. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Help us reach 1,000 followers and be part of this incredible journey. You won't want to miss what comes next. The sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow over the small, quiet house. Inside, the air felt thick with the weight of unsaid words. Diep sat by the window, her eyes tracing the horizon, but her mind wandered elsewhere. The pain in her chest refused to subside. She had been searching for hours, desperately hoping to find what she had lost. Yet each step only deepened the hollow emptiness inside her. Her body ached, not from physical exhaustion, but from the grief that had settled within her. James stood behind her, his presence a silent comfort. He knew there was nothing he could say to ease her pain. Nothing that would make her feel whole again. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, but it wasn't just the quiet of the moment. It was the silence of loss. Diep had lost more than just a child. She had lost the future she had imagined, the dreams she had cherished. The promise of motherhood, of nurturing life, was now nothing more than a memory. Diep, James began, his voice barely above a whisper, but his words trailed off. There was no need to speak. They both understood. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, the only gesture that seemed to offer any kind of solace. She didn't turn to him, didn't speak, just sat there in the fading light, letting the silence wrap around them like an unspoken agreement. Maybe it's just not meant to be, she finally muttered, her voice cracking under the weight of her grief. James stayed quiet, watching as the tears welled up in her eyes. He wished there was something more he could do, but this was a battle she had to face alone, though he would be there beside her, as he always had been. The room was bathed in a soft, melancholic glow from the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the floor. Diep sat on the edge of the worn-out sofa, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, fingers digging into the fabric as if to anchor herself to the present moment. The house around her felt still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something, or someone, to break the silence. James sat nearby, but not too close, respecting the space she needed. He could feel the heaviness in the air, a weight so thick that it seemed to push down on him, forcing his chest to tighten with each passing second. Every so often, his eyes would glance at Diep, but he remained silent, unsure if his presence was a comfort or just another reminder of the emptiness that filled the space between them. Diep's mind raced with thoughts of what could have been, replaying the moments of hope, the quiet excitement she had felt when she first learned of the life growing inside her. The dream of motherhood had seemed so close, so within reach, but now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her heart ached with a longing she couldn't name, and the silence only made it worse. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, marking the passing time, but each second felt like an eternity. Diep closed her eyes and exhaled deeply, trying to steady herself, but the sorrow was too strong. She had lost something she couldn't fully grasp, and no amount of waiting, no amount of time would bring it back. James finally broke the silence, his voice soft and hesitant. "Diep, maybe we should think about what's next. Maybe there's a way to find peace in all this." But Diep didn't respond. She simply sat there, looking at nothing, as if the very idea of moving forward was a betrayal of everything she had lost. Her heart wasn't ready to let go, not yet. The evening sky had deepened to a soft violet, the sun now hidden behind a thick veil of clouds, leaving only a faint trace of its warmth. Inside, the quiet was almost oppressive, a gentle reminder of the storm raging inside Diep's heart. She sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the floor, not wanting to meet James's eyes. Every part of her wanted to hold on to the past, to refuse the inevitable changes that were knocking at the door. James moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate, as though he feared disturbing the fragile peace between them. He knelt beside her, looking at her with a tenderness that was almost painful. "Diep," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know this is hard, but sometimes we have to let go of what was in order to make space for what can be." Diep shook her head, her chest tightening at the very thought. "I don't want to let go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How can I? How can I let go of something that was so real, so full of promise?" James's hand hovered near hers, but he didn't touch her yet. Instead, he simply looked at her with an understanding that pierced through the walls she had built around herself. "I don't want you to forget. You don't have to forget. But you have to find a way to heal, to let the pain live its course and not let it consume you." His words were soft, but they carried the weight of years of experience, years of understanding the inevitability of loss. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and filled with unsaid things. Diep closed her eyes, her heart breaking once more. She hadn't expected the pain to feel this sharp, this unbearable. But James's words, though simple, began to seep through her defenses. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps it was time to move forward, even if she wasn't ready. "Please," she whispered almost to herself. "I don't want to forget, but I don't know how to move on." James gently placed his hand on hers, the warmth of his touch offering a small but significant comfort. "You don't have to do it alone," he murmured. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves outside as the wind whispered through the trees. Diep sat at the small wooden table, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, lost in thought. James had left to take care of some things, giving her a moment of solitude to process everything. The silence felt heavy, yet it was the only space where Diep could truly hear herself think. It was then that the door creaked open, and in walked her aunt, the warmth in her eyes a stark contrast to the somber atmosphere of the room. She carried a small basket with her, the familiar scent of homemade treats filling the air as she set it down on the table. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing," she said softly, sitting across from Diep. Diep offered a small, tired smile, but it barely reached her eyes. "I'm managing," she replied, her voice faint. "It's just hard." Her aunt nodded knowingly, her gaze gentle as she leaned forward. "I know, sweetie, I know. It's never easy to lose something we care about." She paused for a moment, her expression turning wistful as she looked out the window. "You know, I once had a dog, just like you had Haki. He was my best friend, always by my side, but one day he just disappeared. No explanation, no warning. I searched everywhere, asked everyone, but he was gone, and it broke my heart." Diep's eyes flicked up to meet her aunt's, surprise and curiosity softening the sorrow in her gaze. "I thought I could never move on from him," her aunt continued, her voice quiet but firm. "But life has a way of moving forward, whether we're ready or not, and sometimes you have to let go, even when it feels impossible." She reached out and gently took Diep's hand in hers. "It's not forgetting. It's simply finding a way to keep living, to make room for new memories, even in the midst of the pain." Diep swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. Her aunt's words felt like a balm on her wounded soul, a reminder that she was not alone in her grief. "But what if I can't let go?" Diep asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her aunt smiled softly, the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepening with the wisdom of years lived. "You don't have to. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, no matter what happens, you'll always carry the love with you. That never goes away." The air was thick with tension as Diep sat on the worn-out sofa, the weight of the conversation with her aunt still lingering in her mind. The house, once a place filled with the bustle of life and laughter, now felt hollow, as though the walls themselves were mourning the loss with her. She had heard her aunt's words, felt their truth, but something within her was still unwilling to let go. James returned in the late afternoon, his footsteps heavy as he crossed the threshold. He glanced at Diep, noting the faraway look in her eyes. He knew she was still processing the overwhelming pain, the gaping hole in her heart that seemed impossible to fill. "I've been thinking," James began, his voice steady but gentle. He took a seat beside her, though not too close, respecting her space. "Maybe it's time for a change, a fresh start, a new chapter." Diep looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice thick with uncertainty. "I mean," James continued carefully, "maybe it's time we think about moving, finding a place where you can feel safe, a place that can help you heal, away from the memories that haunt this house." He paused, his gaze softening as he watched her reaction. "I know it's hard to leave behind everything, but sometimes we need a change to help us move forward." Diep was quiet for a long moment. She could feel her heart clenching at the thought of leaving behind the familiar walls that had witnessed her happiest and most painful moments. "But I don't want to leave this place," she murmured, her voice fragile. "This is where I've built my life. It's where I have memories of everything." James nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it. But maybe it's not about leaving the memories behind. Maybe it's about giving yourself space to breathe, to heal, without the constant reminder of what you've lost." Diep looked away, torn between the comfort of the past and the uncertainty of what moving forward might mean. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she whispered. James reached out, gently touching her arm. "You don't have to make any decisions today, but I'm here, Diep. Whatever you decide, I'll be with you. You don't have to carry this alone." The room felt still, as if time had momentarily paused, waiting for Diep to find her path forward. James's words settled deep within her, planting a seed of hope, though she wasn't sure if she was ready to let it grow just yet. The night descended quietly, casting a soft stillness over the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, its subtle hum echoing the thoughts swirling in Diep's mind. She stood by the window, staring out into the darkened world beyond, feeling the weight of her grief pressing against her chest. The idea of moving forward, of letting go of everything she had known, seemed impossible. How could she leave behind the place where so many memories had been made? James's words from earlier lingered in her mind. You don't have to forget, you just need to find a way to heal. But even with the comfort of his understanding, Diep wasn't sure how to begin the process of healing. How could she let go of the dream she had held so dearly, the vision of a life that had now shattered? Her thoughts were interrupted by James's soft voice. Diep. His tone was gentle, as if he understood the battle raging inside her. He stepped closer, his presence calming, but not forcing. I know it feels like letting go means losing everything, but you don't have to. You're still you. The past will always be part of you, but it doesn't have to define you. Tears welled up in Diep's eyes as she looked at him. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What if it breaks me to try? James reached out, cupping her face in his hands. It's okay to be scared, but you don't have to do this alone. I'm here, every step of the way. With a slow breath, Diep closed her eyes. She didn't have all the answers, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to move forward, one step at a time. The morning light was soft, spilling into the room, but the stillness in Diep's heart remained. She had spent the night turning over everything in her mind, and though the pain still lingered, something had shifted. There was a small, fragile hope growing inside her, a seed planted by James's words. She sat at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup, the weight of her decision settling in. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about moving forward ever was. But Diep knew she couldn't keep holding on to the past, to a life that no longer existed. The loss, the grief. It would always be with her, but it didn't have to control her. James appeared in the doorway, his eyes searching hers, waiting for some sign, some confirmation. She met his gaze, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a flicker of peace. She was ready to take the next step. I've decided, Diep said quietly, her voice steady but full of emotion. I'll try to move forward, even if it's hard. James's face softened, and a small relieved smile tugged at his lips. We'll take it one step at a time, together, he said, his voice full of conviction. And though the future was uncertain, though the road ahead was unclear, Diep felt a sense of calm settle over her. The pain would always be there, but it no longer had to define her. She had the strength to build a new life, and with James by her side, maybe she could find a way to heal. The journey was just beginning, and in that moment, Diep felt the quiet pull of hope, a light flickering ahead in the distance.
Diep đối mặt với những nỗi đau mất đứa con, một mất mát sâu sắc, và cô không thể lý giải. James, người yêu thương và luôn ở bên cô, cố gắng an ủi và khuyên cô hãy để quá khứ lại phía sau, để tìm kiếm sự bình yên. Dù cảm giác không thể chấp nhận được sự mất mát, Diep dần hiểu rằng mình phải học cách buông bỏ để tiếp tục sống. Sau khi nhận được sự động viên từ người cô, Diep quyết định sẽ thử bước tiếp, dù con đường phía trước đầy những thử thách. Cùng với Sim, cô bắt đầu đối diện với nỗi kiếm một tương lai nơi cô có thể chữa lành và tiếp tục sống.